Good morning. I hope you liked that meditation. It was a powerful and profound part of my own healing because one of the things I didn't have was a solid mother figure in my life, and you'll hear a little bit more about that. But before that, how many of you were here when I talked about death and dying? Okay, so there's some people that weren't here for that. Today I'm going to talk about a different kind of dying. The kind of dying that we each have to do, sometimes daily, sometimes yearly, throughout our life in order to be all that we're meant to be. And I'm going to start with this poem by Jeanette and Chineas. It's called Gathering Light for Winter. When you have no words for the wounds, when your body is as hollowed out and dark as a jack-o'-lantern in November, when you've lost your north, your south, your east, and your west, stay still. Words for the pain are forming beneath the skin of your patience. Your body is gathering light for winter. Your compass is emerging through water. Sometimes dying is the only way to live again. It may take all your stories away. It may hunt and kill your pride, so you're left with nothing but questions and space howling into the night. What next? What now? What for? This is when grace pours her warm milk into your wounds and advises you to rest, to steal the secrets of sorrow and learn her heavy song so that you can become an instrument or resilience, turning ever forward with more than you were born with. For isn't holding hands with sorrow a bridge? Dying while you're still alive, birthing your next self, and courageously beginning anew. So how many of you here feel like you had less than perfect parenting? Most of you, okay? How many of you feel like you have some trauma in your history? And how many of you at times are challenged still by that trauma or by ongoing anxiety? All right. Thank you for your honesty. I'm here as a poster child for resilience. And there are some in the psychotherapeutic community that believe that once you've been traumatized, particularly when a young age, there's never a way to fully recover from it. I'm here to tell you that simply is not true. It absolutely is not true. And my life, my body, my spirit is a testament to that. One of the things that I learned in my own process fairly early, and I'm so grateful for, is in order to fully heal, in order to fully move into wholeness, which is what healing really is, no spiritual bypasses are allowed. And what's so wonderful about this community, you address everything. You address the body, you address the spirit, you address the psyche, and that's so critically important to heal. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my history, and both how I survived and then how I completely healed that history. I was born to an unwed mother, and according to my aunts, we don't know who my father was. It could have been any Tom, Dick, or Harry, or maybe my Uncle Clinton. By the time I was 2, my mother and I were living with my Uncle Clinton, who I called Daddy. And they had been incestuous since childhood. And one Thanksgiving morning, he shot himself in front of my mother and I. My mother went crazy and beat the crap out of me, threw me upstairs in the crib, and left the house. My Aunt Ethel was furious because it was Thanksgiving and we were supposed to be there for dinner. This was up in Hayward area. And we didn't show up, so she came to the house, searched the whole house, except for upstairs where I was. She went halfway up the stairs calling my mother's name, and there was no answer, and a blizzard had started. So she hurried up and called the sheriff. And the sheriff and the coroner came. They removed my uncle's dead body, and they didn't search the house because my aunt said she had. 3 days later, my mother stumbled drunk into the memorial service, and everybody wanted to know where I was, and she didn't remember. So that was my first memory. A part of that memory is something else. It's really important that you keep foremost in your mind and in front of the trauma. I managed to scoot on my butt one day, and I didn't know. I only knew that my shoulder and my arm hurt. And I remember holding it like this and scooting on the stairs down my butt because I had a broken collarbone and arm. And I tried to get the front door open. And I was able to get it open, and then the snow started to drift in. And the snow drifted in. It was so cold. Luckily, I didn't go out, or I wouldn't be here today. And I sat on the floor in this shaft of sunlight and started sucking my thumb, and I heard a voice. And the voice told me to go back upstairs very carefully and to get in my bed and to cover up. And that voice has continued to be with me off and on throughout my life to this day. Now, whether that was an angelic presence or some kind of guide, I have no idea. I always called her the dancing lady because it felt like, probably because of the illusion of the wind, that she was dancing in front of me, and I could actually see her. And it was this very ethereal light being. So that was my first experience of spirit. Of course, trauma is trauma, so I regressed, and I was put back in diapers. I was mute for the next 2 years. I lived with one of my aunts and my grandmother and my cousins, and my mother finally blew back in one day when I was watching Howdy Doody, and had a fight with my aunt and took me. And then I lived with her until I was 13. She made her living as a prostitute. We always lived near either Air Force and naval bases or Army bases that had strips right outside the bases, and so my early years are colored in neon lights because often she would drag me to bars and I'd fall asleep in the bar, etc. It's amazing that I have a stomach and that I'm as healthy as I am because most of my food was bar food in the early years. My mother neither fed herself nor fed me, so I would get thrown potato chips and Coca-Cola and Hershey's candy bars. So for years, guess what my comfort food was? Potato chips, Coca-Cola, and Hershey's candy bars. And it was really important to get in touch with that and to stop using those items as comfort food because they had been comforting then. Because we know they're not healthy, they're not good for us. My mother not only prostituted herself, but at 9 she prostituted me for the first time. And then there was a whole series of men. I had my first suicide attempt that same year. And an amazing thing happened. At that point in my life, I couldn't understand why I was born or what the meaning of life was. I felt like this alien from another planet, and why would anyone want to be here? And I was extremely depressed, very anxious. And one day, my mother had been gone for 3 days, and by then she was leaving me alone, except when she brought someone home. And I was sitting out on the front steps, and some neighborhood kids started to tease me. And before you know it, when they figured out my mother wasn't home, they ran past me, ran into our apartment, and slammed the door. And I was frantically trying to push the door open from the outside as they were pushing on the inside, and the upper part of the door was glass, and I pushed my way through it. So literally blood and screams and broken glass everywhere. The kids all fled except one little girl named Barbara, who hauled me up the street to the freestanding emergency room where I literally had hundreds of stitches. And afterwards, we're on our way home with a note in my pocket and a packet of pills for the pain, and both arms and hands completely wrapped up. I'm sobbing, not because of what I've just gone through or the stitches, but because I know I'm going to get the crap beat out of me when I get home because of the mess in the hallway. I walk into the hallway astounded, and there's a man who's putting in a new window and everything's been cleaned up. And he turns and he looks at me and he said, "My wife heard you screaming. We live upstairs. And she came down and cleaned everything up after she saw the trail of blood up to the emergency room. We literally lived a block from a weekend freestanding emergency room. And that's where Barbara had dragged me. And he said, she's made chocolate chip cookies and made lunch for you, so go on up now. Tell her I'm almost done here. This woman's name was Dale. I only knew her for a month and a half after that, before they moved. But she showered me with kindness. I still have a key. I almost brought it today to show you. It was given to me to spend the night on their couch, but I was too afraid, but they gave me the extra key anyhow, and it was called the just in case key. The day that Dale moved, I was beside myself with grief. And she pulled me into her arms, and I sobbed in her arms, and she kept saying, I love you, you're a good girl. I love you, you're going to be okay. And I felt the energy of love, and something came alive in me that changed me forever. Suddenly, I knew why I was born. I was born to understand this thing. I was born to feel it and experience it and learn how to give it. And then Dale sat me up. She held my face in her hands, looked into my eyes, and she said, I wish I could take you with me, but I can't. And you need to learn to reach out to other people and trust other people, because your mother's too sick and can't care for you. And it's not your fault. And so I did. After she left, I reached out for one person after another, who in a book I'm writing, I call them angels wearing the face of compassion and human skin. So there were many of those such angels. When I was 13, I was taken away from my mom. This is still pre-child protection years. And so they had nowhere to put me. So I was put in one insane environment after another. By the time I was a senior in high school, I had been through 7 placements. I had also been quite traumatized, because when the court got a hold of us before I was removed, for a couple of years we were sent to a psychiatrist who ended up being a naval psychiatrist who literally became my mom's pimp. And there were parties at Great Lakes naval stations with children as well as women. So as Gary talked about, Jay talked about institutional abuse in my background. That's absolutely true. And he would take me not only to Great Lakes Naval Station for parties, but all kinds of manners of insanity. So I ended up getting a scholarship to go to college. The summer after, I fell apart because I found out the dorms were going to close and I had nowhere to go and I had no resources. And my old default as an adolescent had been, when I'd get really scared and really anxious, I'd take an overdose of pills. Well, at this point, I'm mature enough and I'd done enough work that I immediately made myself throw up. And I went and saw the dorm mother and told her what I did. And I said, I'm so sorry. I didn't want to do that. I'm so scared. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to find another place to live. I don't have any money. I have nowhere to go. She said, I can help you figure that out, but I want you to go to the hospital to figure out, make sure that you're okay medically. So she put me in a taxi and I went to the hospital. And the next thing you know, even though I checked out fine medically, I'm being sent to a place called Illinois State Psychiatric Institute. And I didn't know this till years later, when I found a woman who had known me there, a nurse who was getting her doctorate, but they were doing research through the Cold War. And so I kept trying to get rid of all the drugs they'd give me. I'd pocket them, I'd spit them out as soon as I got a chance. I didn't know why they were taking blood tests or urine analysis once a week, and they found that I never had the drugs in me, so they started giving me shots. I ran away twice. After the second time, they had me committed to the worst hospital in the system, a place called Elgin State Hospital. And if it hadn't been for another one of those angels, Sidney Krampus, I probably would have died there. And I'm not exaggerating. Sydney had been getting her doctorate at Illinois State Psychiatric Institute, and she was so appalled at my commitment and felt it was illegal, she said she would do everything in her power to get me out, and she did, and it took her 15 months. after lots of years of incredible work, of lots of transformation, it was only 5 years ago that I talked about Elgin for the first time and faced that part of my history. Why? Because there was still some residual shame. And I was invited by a mentor of mine, Dina Metzger, who's a writer. If you've never read her book, Reign of Nightbirds, I strongly recommend it. Dina is an older woman, she's in her 80s, and she asked me what I was doing that summer, and I said, not anything. I was thinking about, I have all this paid time off, I was thinking about a road trip, and she said, what about a road trip to see me and drive me? She lives in Southern California, all the way up to Washington State. I want to interview Yakima elders for my next book and go to the Hanford nuclear site. So I was actually doing some research for Dina, and guess what came up? Flashed on the screen the kind of research that was done at Elgin State Hospital. And Dina later said, you don't look very good. What happened to you today? And I said, well, when I was doing that research for you, I found a flash of my past. She said, what was it? Tell me. So I told her, and she said, and why didn't I ever hear about this before? It was sort of the last secret. And I had, in my own mind, I had partitioned it off to irrelevant, not realizing that it was so central to my story. So pay attention to that in yourself. Pay attention to that which you refuse to look at. The places where you draw the line in the sand, because often that's where our greatest learning is. You can imagine the kind of multi-layered trauma I had. It was very significant. And therapy was difficult back when I was doing therapy. It was difficult because we didn't know as much about trauma as we do now. So I had to go through every single bit of my trauma history. It felt like I was walking through a field that had landmines everywhere, and I never knew when one would go off. I had a devoted therapist, however, who no matter what, she kept me working. She wouldn't let me go on Social Security. And I'm not saying that Social Security is bad, that some people shouldn't be supported in that way, but for me, it would have been a way of giving up. Because by then, I had an advanced degree. I was already working as a therapist. The problem is, I had this past life, and then I had the professional life, and I needed to begin to weave those together in order to be fully who I am. So it was a lot of work. The other thing is, meditation became central to my life. Having really good teachers, and there's that quote, when the student's ready, the teacher appears, and I could tell you story after story of how that was true in my life. We just have to ask. The other thing that was essential in my own healing is body work, because the body also holds memories. I had done a ton of body work, but I had a spiritual teacher who one day said to me, I want you to get a cat, preferably a kitten. I said, why? I don't even know if I like cats. And she said, do you trust me? And I said, absolutely. She said, get one anyway. So I get this little orange ball of fur. This teacher was brilliant. Her name was Barbara. And get this little beautiful kitten, and within 3 days I learned that I was capable of murder. Literally. Before that, one of the feelings that I had so suppressed was anger, because my mother was also a rageaholic, and she was surrounded by rageful people, so I never wanted to be that or to look at that. And I didn't realize what that was suppressing in me. Well, this cat became known by all my friends as the little shit. And he would jump up in the middle of the night and turn the lights off. He'd jump on me, biting me, and one night I pulled him, those little claws off of me, and I was just shaking and threw him, and he hit the wall, and that's when I got scared.
So I put a notice up at work that I was looking for a home for this adorable kitten with his picture, and he was gone. And I was relieved, and I called Barbara, and I said, I just couldn't keep him. I had to give him away. She said, you need to get him back. I said, why? I'll kill him. And she said, no, but something in you is going to die unless you're willing to face and deal with your injured instincts. Those are really important words. What this cat was bringing out was my anger and my rage, and all the times I'd get jerked awake by my mother and men in the middle of the night when I had to suppress my feelings. All of that was coming out. So I found a really good body worker. I mean, this little shit, not only would he turn the lights on at night, I unscrewed the light in the ceiling, then he figured out I was turning the lamp off and on, and he'd mess with the lamp till he'd knock it over, so I'd put it on its side before I go to bed. Then he'd jump up when I was in the bathroom and turn the lights off when I'm in the shower. And if anyone was over, he was like a whirlwind that would knock all the shelves off, books, and anything in his way. He was literally like a tiny tornado. The day that I worked through all the anger and the rage, he stopped behaving that way. To the day. He was mirroring what was unworked through in me. And that teacher knew he would be a perfect mirror. His name was Honey. And then his nickname became Velcro because he was such a lovey boy. I mean, it was amazing. Not only had I gone through a profound transformation, but so had Honey. You know, there's animals and can speak to us, can teach us in so many ways. How many of you have had animals that teach you? Yeah. So you know what that's like. Messages come in a lot of ways. One of the first things that Dina Metzger, my writing mentor, told me to do, and Dina mentors people in lots of different ways, was I needed to start looking at all of the ways and times in which Spirit had intervened in my life. Through dreams, through just the right poem, through synchronicity, through just the right person. And I needed then to begin to gather them and look at the patterns. And she taught me that Spirit teaches us through specific patterns, but often they don't come clustered all in the same way. Often, sometimes through insects. Through other kinds of sentient nature, through flowers, through animals. And so then you can begin to see how Spirit is talking to you and track the patterns. So part of my book is also about those patterns that I discovered. And it's something I strongly recommend that you do. Years before, a previous teacher I had, Dahani Yawahu, who's a 27th generation lineage holder in the Cherokee Sagala Nation, she told me that I had worked enough on my trauma. Now I needed to find all the joy markers that had helped sustain me. And so I was ready for that deeper level of work of finding the patterns that Dina was having me look at as I got ready to write this book. So find the joy markers. And sometimes people who have a lot of trauma will say, but there weren't any. And I would have thought the same thing, but guess what? You wouldn't be here had there not been. Perhaps it was a teacher. Perhaps it was a physician who was caring, like in my life. When I was a senior in high school, I fell apart. I think part of it was terror about going off to college. Part of it, I just wasn't getting the support that I needed around a lot of things, and I had a suicide attempt, and it was pretty significant. And I was in a small county hospital, and my foster parents came in and said, we're not letting you come back to us. You're going to have to do whatever the court wants you to do. We thought we could make a difference in your life, and obviously we were wrong. You're never going to amount to anything. And the court worker came in and said that I was going back to my mother because she had nowhere else to put me. And you can just imagine, I'll leave it to your imaginations, what happened that first night with my mother. So another suicide attempt. Often you don't have the language to speak about unbelievable horror when shame is attached to it. And it's essential you find the language. You find someone who can hold hope for you until you can get it back. You know, these suicide gestures, all they did is do havoc with my body. But it was the only language back then I knew. And there wasn't anyone back then that we didn't even have a definition of trauma in the DSM back then. So I had another suicide attempt, went back to, I was nearly found dead. I'd aspirated my own vomit in the park, was taken back to the county hospital. She came in and she said, "You're not going to manipulate me, young lady. You're going back to your mother, whether you like it or not." And I pulled the IV tubing out and tried to strangle myself and nearly succeeded. And a couple days later, I'm laying in bed in restraints because they were afraid that I'd hurt myself at this point, understandably. And the physician in charge of this small county hospital, a man named Dr. Callahan, came in, pulled a chair up, and he said, "I'm not going to ask you why you're trying to hurt yourself because I don't think you tell me. But my nurses tell me you're a bright young lady and you have a scholarship to go to college, but I'm afraid if we can't get you out of here, that's not going to happen. And I'm concerned because you've been in bed so long, so I'm wondering if I get the head nurse to come and walk with us, if you just do a couple of walks down to the end of the hall with me while I tell you a little idea I've had and see what you think." So I agreed to not hurt myself, and they took me out of the restraints, and he and his head nurse, Connie, walked me down to the end of the hall. And we sat down, and he said, "This place used to be a TB sanitarium. We have all kinds of buildings we don't use. See that little cottage out there? Sometimes, guests stay out there. But if you can pull yourself together and bring me your graduation certificate, I'll hire you as a nursing assistant for the summer and have my nurses teach you, and you can live in that little cottage rent-free." So I did that. I agreed. Miss Flynn took me back to my mother's. I grabbed my stuff as soon as she left. I was fortunate she didn't take me into my mother's. She just dropped me off in front. And I went and I stored my stuff in the bus station, and I was homeless for the next month and a half. I graduated from high school. I took the bus across town, all excited with my diploma. And they had me call in once a week to tell them how I was progressing. So I had that safety net and that promise that they were going to continue to be there for me. I walk into the nurse's station, and the nurse's station is decorated with a banner and balloons and a graduation cake and small presents from the staff at this little county hospital. You don't know what can make a difference in a person's life. Sometimes it's the smallest acts of kindness, and it's you're willing to be present to such a degree that you listen to your own intuition and you become presence, where a third thing happens between you. One of the people I work for is Prairie Care, and Dr. Steven Sederberg is the owner and founder and president of Prairie Care, an amazing, deeply spiritual man. So Prairie Care is a very different kind of mental health organization, or I wouldn't be working in it. Years ago, when I first started working there and doing a lot of consulting work, he and I were having a conversation, and he said, "Do you have any questions of me?" And the question that came for me because of my intrinsic mistrust of psychiatrists was, what makes your heart sing? And he says, "Oh, what an interesting question. Nobody's ever asked me that, but I can tell you the answer." He says, "Sometimes I'm sitting with a patient, it may be a child or an adult or a family, and the space opens between us." He says, "It's alive and it's almost electric." He said, I don't have the language for it. He said, "But that's sacred space, and that's real medicine." So you want to surround yourself, if you're still working with trauma, with people who carry real medicine, who can see who you are, who can see not just the pain and the suffering and the symptoms, but your potential. And they can help provide that bridge for you. Music, the piece of music that we played right before I spoke, was one of the ways I listened to it probably daily for a year. And it wasn't that singer, it was a much earlier version of it, but I listened to that song almost daily to once and for all heal the mother wound in myself, because I was always attracted to these older mother figures. And then, guess what would come up? My terror. And so there'd be all this transference. Finally, I was able to work through most of that with the therapist I had, but we were at a point where she was weaning me. It was time to be emancipated from therapy. It was time to grow up, and it was bringing up all that panic of abandonment, and that song helped heal me. There's some incredible songs available now. So music, both because of the vibration of music, which works on our individual vibration, as well as sometimes the lyrics themselves can be profoundly healing. The other thing that had a profound impact on me that I think I didn't come across it till 22 years ago, but I started working for an organization called the Center for Mind-Body Medicine out of Washington, D.C. And what Dr. James Gordon started the center, and he was a Harvard-trained psychiatrist, another one of the psychiatrists, the good guys that I love and admire and respect. We've been each other's teachers in many ways. And that work teaches people about the physiology of stress and trauma in a particular model. So that work has taken me all over the world. I've been to Gaza and to Haiti and to Turkey and to Jordan and other parts of the Middle East, and worked with firefighters after 9/11, as well as people at the Pentagon, people down Katrina, after Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, and I just came back from working a month in Parkland, Florida, with teachers and youth as they return to get ready to go back to school. And that's a community that I hope you'll keep in your prayers, because it's not just that the shooting occurred there. Because the kids became such activists, all of us have seen them on TV, they have also become targets. And so it's been less publicized, and less in the news, but for instance, they were doing a demonstration at a great big grocery store that at that point was giving all their proceeds of different fundraisers to the gun right activists. And they had just changed that the day before. So they were doing a protest of a die-in, and they had put the outlines of the kids who were shot out in the parking lot, and their names on them, and then they had the little electric candles they were each holding as they laid on the floor, and they were naming those individuals. And there were parents who'd lost their children, as well as kids, and a bunch of people who really aren't well, showed up. They blocked the exits and hurled the most degrading, horrible names at these people. One father told me that he almost got up and started a fight, and then they had guns. There probably would have been gunfire. And he just laid there and kept meditating on his son's name over and over again. So it's a community that has sort of had one trauma after another. But that work, understanding how your physiology works and learning how to tiptoe into trauma, learning that we literally have the capacity to turn off the fight-flight response. Most people don't even know that. We understand how our cars work and pay better attention to the indicator lights on our cars than to these marvelously made bodies we have. So learning that work and all the different breathing techniques and guided imagery and meditative techniques and active moving techniques that can literally turn off the fight-flight response and move you back into biochemical stability faster. So it's really important if you're dealing with trauma or anxiety or just the stress in today's world to learn about that. Because what we know is if left to its own devices, even worrying about something turns on the fight-flight response. When we go to What-Ifville, and I used to live in What-Ifville, I'm sure I bought land there. What we know is that turns on the stress response as well, and we can turn it off. And it's not as hard as it might seem. And we've come from an era in which we thought the only thing would work was pills. Or the only thing would work is this or that. And that's simply not true. So all of those things have made a difference and so much more in my life. Body work, many various forms of meditation, understanding my own nervous system, being able to talk about that, talk about what's coming up for me out loud at times with people. Because when we have what Alice Miller called an enlightened witness, someone who isn't going to, go into a pity pot with you. Someone like my good friend Michelle, who one day about 12 years ago, we were out to lunch, and I was about to take a new job and was having some lack of confidence. And Michelle dramatically set down her coffee cup. She said, "Lora, Matz, that's the biggest bunch of shit I've heard come out of your mouth in years." That's an enlightened witness. That's someone who's going to keep us honest. We all need them. We all need community. The other thing that's so critical is looking at our belief systems. And this is true whether you have trauma or not. Because our belief systems either imprison us or they give us wings. I was a special ed teacher for years before I went back to graduate school because I didn't think I was smart enough. I didn't learn to read till the end of third grade, and it was only by the grace of a substitute teacher that I did learn to read. Part of the problem was they always sat me in the back of the room, and I couldn't see because I needed glasses, and no one had ever asked me why I couldn't read until this woman. So I still carried that belief that I wasn't very smart from elementary school, and that's why I didn't think I was smart enough to go to graduate school. Not only did I go to graduate school and graduate summa cum laude, but I got that year's Counseling Student Award. Outstanding Counseling Student Award. Go figure. The only thing that was limiting me were those false beliefs. So it's really important to begin to examine them, to pay attention to them, to ask yourself, is that really true? Another time one of those beliefs showed up, I was working in Tucson as a director of a program, and the man who owned Canyon Ranch wanted me to come for 3 weeks to go through one of their programs in the summer to see if we should integrate some of what they were doing at Canyon Ranch into the program I was running at Sunstone. So the first thing they did at Canyon Ranch, and it's one of those big spas, used to be Oprah's favorite, they put me on a treadmill, and I had rheumatic fever twice as a little kid. So I'm on the treadmill, and suddenly this voice from the past comes up, "You're sweating, you're going to die." Because that's what I was told when I had rheumatic fever. And because I'd worked so much by then on beliefs, I said, "Not now, not here. It'd be bad publicity. Keep running." But then I realized that's why I had never joined a gym, why I didn't like sweating at all. I didn't like walking fast. I didn't like running. I didn't like any kind of sports. It came from that early belief, and that was old. They believed that you'd have heart damage back then if you'd had rheumatic fever, and they now know in today's medicine that's not even true. So beliefs are subtle. So pay attention to them, and really start loving yourself. Start loving yourself. Christ said it. He said, "Love your neighbor as yourself." Also, get in touch with the divine feminine. It's that part of us that creates an opening. It's connected to our receptivity. It's connected to our willingness to be able to receive from here as well as from here. So find ways to get in touch with that aspect of yourself. And I suspect you men in this group, if you're coming to a men's group here, and working on emotional intelligence and all of that, you're probably really getting in touch with that aspect of yourselves as well. And that's really important for all of us humans at this point on the planet. So thank you very much. And I'm happy to answer questions at the end of our time together. And thank you for your attention and your receptivity. You create all that moves in light. You shine within us, outside us, Even darkness shines whenever we remember. Focus your light within us, make it useful as the rays of a beacon show the way. Help us breathe one holy breath, feeling only you. This creates a shrine inside in wholeness. Create your reign of unity now through our fiery hearts and willing hands. Help us love beyond our ideals and sprout acts of compassion for all creatures. Unite the crowd within in a vision of passionate purpose, light mates with form. Grant what we need each day in bread and insight. Give us the food we need to grow through each new day, through each illumination of life's needs. Loose the cords of mistakes binding us as we release the strands we hold of others' guilt. Forgive our hidden past, the secret shames as we consistently forgive what others hide. Don't let surface things delude us. Free us from what holds us back from our true purpose. Out of you, the astonishing fire, the birthing glory, returning light and sound to the cosmos, the song that beautifies and renews all. These are the Aramaic words of the Lord's Prayer, translated by Neil Douglas Clance. And from the Beatitudes, blessed are you who mourn, you shall be comforted. Blessed are you in emotional turmoil, you shall be united inside by love. Tuned to the source are those feelings deeply confused by life. They shall be returned from their wandering. The other thing that I didn't mention is my mother. In the end, I was able to forgive my mother, in part because I was able to find compassion by learning about her history during the Depression. So take a moment, and if there's anyone that you feel like you at least want to set the intention to forgive and to release from the cords that bind you in anger, in hatred, in hurt, take a moment to at least set the intention to learn more about that person so that you can find a place of compassion in your heart. And now let's just take a moment and go around from my left around the circle and close the circle with one word about what you're leaving with today. Love. And nice and loud, everybody. Peace, be kind to yourselves today, and find another human or animal or being to be kind to as well.